You know what I've been thinking about? Wreck-It Ralph. See, I have two kids, two small boys, and I watch a lot of the stuff that they watch, and I've seen Wreck-It Ralph and its sequel, Ralph Breaks the Internet, a dozen times each. I like the first one fine. It's Toy Story, but with video games, and it's pretty good. It's pretty solid. I think it could be better, but ultimately it's pretty good. Nothing really that wrong with it. But the second one just bugs me. It bugs me a lot. And I have real problems with it. It just kind of doesn't work as a movie. It feels wrong in a host of ways. And I'm going to tell you about it. So the first Wreck-It Ralph is about Wreck-It Ralph, the bad guy in the hero's game, Fix-It Felix Jr. Bad guy is tired of being a bad guy. He decides to go rogue, or as they call it in the movie, he's in danger of going turbo, as they say. And he runs off, and he wants to win a medal to prove that he can be a good guy. And he does it, but he ends up trapped in a racing video game, candy-based racing video game. So the movie is more of a kind of filled with candy jokes than video game jokes, but whatever. He meets an annoying little character, he becomes a friend, he realizes he can be a good guy through his own actions, and he has some kind of redemption where he does good through using what he's naturally good at, which is punching things until they break. And it works. It's solid. It's not great, but it works. I really like it. A few years pass, and we get Ralph Breaks the Internet. And it feels wrong from the beginning. And a lot of it has to do with the fact that Ralph is no longer the main character. Now, an interesting piece of background information about this movie, about the first movie, an interesting piece of information about the first movie is that the writers originally wanted to make the movie about Fix-It Felix Jr. He was the main character in the early drafts. But when they were writing, they discovered that having this character who wins all of the time and is just kind of bored with life, deciding to go rogue and try to get something else out of life made him deeply unlikable.
I don't know. Can you be annoyingly aggressive?
I don't know. Can I? Can I? Can I? Can I? Can I? Can I? Can I?
Oh, do you hear that? It makes sense, right? Fix-It Felix Jr. would be a terrible main character in this sort of story. And then you reach the beginning of Ralph breaks the internet, and Princess Vanellope von Schweetz is the best thing ever in her game. She can win her races sleeping, and she's bored, and she wants more. Does that sound like someone you've heard of before? Yes, it sounds like Fix-It Felix Jr. from those early drafts. And all the way through production and post-production, they essentially made that unlikable main hero in the first film the main character in the second. Do you see how that just doesn't work? I have issues with this movie. So let's break them down real quick. So the second film's plot is that Vanellope von Schweetz is so bored with her game that Ralph goes through a massive effort to make her game more interesting by creating extra tracks within her tracks that provides her fun. But Vanellope is so obsessed with like trying to win it that she fights against the actual player, and the player breaks the game. Breaks off the wheel that controls the racers. So what do they have to do? They have to go into the internet. They have to go to eBay. They have to win the wheel in eBay. And because of reasons, they make it way too expensive, requiring tens of thousands of dollars. And suddenly they have to find a way to make tens of thousands of dollars. So they click pop-up ads and decide to win a bunch of money through playing video games online by getting items and then trying to sell them to other players. This is a kid's movie telling them make a fortune by clicking random ads that promise you great wealth. Okay, whatever. Moving on. And Vanellope just ends up falling in love with one of the games they go into, a place called Murder Race, which is just, racing, but kind of like safe, grungy in silly ways. Sharks popping out of steam vents in the middle of the street to eat things, but it's still a Disney movie, so it's not actually that dangerous. And she ends up falling in love with it so much, and she has a crisis of conscience because she actually belongs there and not the place where she actually belongs, that actually kind of suddenly relies on her existence. Plus, the guy who saved her in the first movie is now too clingy, and he becomes the bad guy. His clinginess is the bad guy. It's not the girl who suddenly decides, screw my life, and screw everyone who relies on me, I'm just going to run off and do what I want. It's the guy who rescued her, and she is his only friend, and he bent over backwards to do things for her to make her happy. He's the bad guy. It's so weird. And then you throw in all of the synergy stuff, because they go to Disney.com and she meets all of the other princesses. There's some fun bits in there, but it's ultimately just kind of pointless. There's a big Star Wars thing. We get to see Groot because any of the other actors would have to have been paid way too much money, I'm sure. So they just get someone to sound like Groot. They don't use Vin Diesel. And, it's all about how ends up being how Ralph is just a bad guy. We have all of this series of subplots about viruses and things that latch on to Ralph and make his insecurities into a giant monster, and it's nonsense. I don't hate the movie. It has interesting things throughout, but ultimately it's okay, at best. But it bothers me. It bothers me a lot. And I would normally have just seen this once and kind of forgotten about it, but again, I have 2 young boys, and they just kind of watch these movies over and over again. There are others, of course, but I've seen both of these like a dozen times, and it's just, it keeps the thoughts fresh in my mind. So, what do you do with something like this? What does it mean? You take your original story, which is kind of a standard hero thing, where, the downtrodden guy needs to prove that he's worth it, and he saves a princess. It's not. There's variation within it about how he, you know, there's variation within it about how she is strong herself. She wins her own race on her own mostly, and it's fine. It works. And then the second one is this complete deconstruction of the first, that almost says that Vanellope would have been better having never conquered anything, because she's just naturally so great as it is. Maybe she should have just waited until she could get out. Although, do they ever explain how Vanellope gets out of the game in the second one? Because that was a big plot in the first one. She couldn't get out because she's a glitch. I guess it fixed it in the end. Whatever. So that's it. That's what bugs me about that movie. No one talks about Wreck-It Ralph anymore. No one cares. The movies were moderate successes. The second one cost more than the first, and it made roughly the same amount of money, so there's a solid chance it actually lost money. But, it's no one cares anymore. There's no talk of a third one. John C. Reilly occasionally mentions it, but, actors mentioning that they want to make a new movie is not actual news. It feels like Disney's just largely let it die off. They don't even have a Disney Plus series, an animated series that they can make for relatively cheap going about it. It's nothing. It just died out. And it's hard not to point the finger at the second movie and how it treated everything, about how it's got a lower IMDb score, it's got lower scores all over the place. It's just people don't like it as much. It costs more money to make, and it's kind of left a sour taste in people's mouths. I don't know if people really can quantify or explicate why it bothers them so much, but it obviously does. Because they would like it as much, if not potentially more, because it's bigger. It's got bigger set pieces. It's got nominally funnier things. People love their references in place of jokes, right? It's like, oh, I know that, ha ha ha. And Wreck-It Ralph 2, Ralph Breaks the Internet, has plenty of that. But it's like the actual storytelling is so muddled. It's so modern Disney, and it just flabbergasts me. I don't know why they did it like this. And it's kind of depressing. Yeah, in a very small way. The first Wreck-It Ralph is pretty good. I like it. And the second Wreck-It Ralph is just a mess. But there's a lot of talent involved. It's hard not to deny the catchiness of the show-stopping tune when Vanellope discovers that she loves being in Murder Race. But it's such a weird thing. For a movie that seems directed at about 8 to 10-year-olds, at the highest, this sort of, inversion of a musical trope just doesn't feel right. It feels random. Do they get it? And, I complain about that. And my kids, especially the younger one, likes to occasionally just sing it. But it's just, and that you find the individual images funny. So I guess it works on a certain level, while it's supposed to be operating on this other level of the inversion of the musical trope. So I guess it works, but it's always felt out of place to me, because, these sorts of movies should be simpler for kids. And then you're piling these psychological issues on top of each other to try to explain, why there is no actual bad guy, but the bad guy is the hero from the first one because, he loves his friend too much. It's bizarre. I don't quite get it. Anyway, no one talks about Wreck-It Ralph, but I just talked about Wreck-It Ralph, and that's all I've got. The movie bugs me. It really bugs me. So, that's it.